the research side of things, I'm always doing that in my business. I'm always trying to look for new creative ideas, looking for new technology that I can incorporate. There's a lot of research around that, looking for potential new collaborators. All of these things have been really transferable and are equally satisfying me in the same role as academia, or even if more. Hey, Ken here from STEMventurist. This is number 3 of a 4-part series of a seminar I recorded about science communication, about what's a career path look like, how do you get into science communication, and more importantly, how do you transition into non-academic roles. And today's talk is all about that, how you transition into a non-academic role, and what are the things that you need to do to be prepared. So I think even if you're not thinking about transitioning into science communication, you'll definitely get value even if you're thinking about any other type of non-academic role. So I hope you enjoy. So I guess that comes to the question is like, okay, so Ken, you're now 0.5 academic, 0.5 in this sort of business role. How have you found that transition process, and what has it been like sort of dipping your feet outside of academia per se? And my feeling is that sometimes I feel like this, that I'm not really dipping my feet in and my whole body's in there and my feet are the only things that are not getting wet at the moment. But I think that sort of comes down to, some of the perspectives of making this decision. And so the other question you might be thinking is that, geez, going part-time academic, I mean, that seems like a very risky thing to do. And in some ways, it is a big risk. But I would like to think that it's more of a calculated risk. So this is actually a picture of me climbing a mountain at the sunny coast, free climbing, but not really free climbing. But you can sort of see that sometimes the perspective changes based on what your knowledge is. So a lot of people outside who don't know me too well or know my background might think that this is the type of risk that I'm taking, but how I perceive it is more this is the type of risk that I perceive that I'm taking, I guess. And so what is the risk? Well, I guess obviously if you go 0.5 part-time academic, that's half the time you're not spending on publishing. And, is that going to lead to lack of publications or lack of grant funding and then spiral you outside of academia? That is the main risk. So the reason why I don't feel like it was as risky a move for me is obviously I've just told you the previous experience that I've had in that science communication role. But I also spent a lot of time researching and trying to understand this. And this is where I think this is useful advice to anyone else who are thinking about transitioning, because these are common questions that I get from people who are thinking about doing this. And so what I did is spend a lot of time researching. I mean, you're researchers, right? So start researching. And things like YouTube are incredibly useful. There's so much content on YouTube that you can watch to understand about different career options. Maybe not so much tailored content specific for science communication, although my channel STEMventurist is touching on this, but sort of adjacent fields that might sort of be able to help you. And I'm seeing more and more scientists who have transitioned out of academia building up YouTube channels, so you just need to go out there and look for them. Alternatively, there's tons of podcasts out there, and this is, I think, more accessible, and there's a lot of really in-depth podcasts out there that talk about different careers. Maybe they're not talking about the transitioning process, but they're talking about the specific industry. And so by listening to those podcasts, you begin to see what the type of language that you need to use. What are the type of skill sets that they're looking for? And, I found listening to podcasts was some of the influential things for helping me make that decision. One for me was listening to the Publish or Perish podcast. Shout out to those guys. Of which one of the guys who runs it, Andy Stapleton, pretty much documents his process of going as a postdoc in material science to a freelancer to then setting up a startup business called Verbalized Science. And so if you're willing to invest in quite a few hours of dialogue about the academic position, but then also getting some of this communications about how to transition, I highly recommend checking out that podcast, Publish Perish podcast. But another really powerful way, and I think somewhere where a lot of people can start, is the idea of an informational interview. Now, a lot of people that I talk to tend not have heard of this concept, but the idea is that you really want to look for someone in a career position that you would like to know more about, or maybe you would like to be in. And the idea is that you approach them and you ask them, hey, I know you're probably busy, but I'm really curious about the field that you're in. I see that you're in this position or role. Would you have 30 minutes to be able to walk me through how you got there, what the industry is like, and what you're looking for new recruits? So the idea is all about just trying to acquire information. And it's not really about asking for a job. That's actually a really bad thing to do right off the bat. But really more focused around the information. Now, the benefit is twofold. One, you can probe them exactly what type of stuff you need on your CV to be competitive in that space or to be able to transition into that space. You can understand the lingo that they're looking for, the type of backgrounds or experiences, what type of positions you need to be in before you can get to where they are. And these are really powerful things. But secondly, it naturally builds up your networking circle. So you might have heard that networking is incredibly important, and as you move outside of academia, that becomes even more important. Sometimes it's not what you know, it's who you know. And so by making this connection with them, if you stay in touch with them and try and provide them some extra value, provide them some content or ask them some more specific questions and keep that relationship flowing, maybe a year or 2 years down the line, maybe a position comes up and they might reach out to you, or you can sort of reach out to them in the future and say, hey, sort of at the ready point to transition now, I've got some skill sets. Do you know of any jobs going around, or are any of your colleagues hiring that I might be a good fit for? And they're more likely to give you a warm invitation then. So they're going to know who you are, and they're more likely to recommend you to that person. And that might give you a leg up when you try to make that transition. So doing informational interviews are incredibly powerful. Hey, quickly interrupting you. If you're getting value out of this video, make sure to like it. Or if you're not subscribed, subscribe here. Let's get back into it. And lastly, it's really important to refresh your online presence. So, how you look to others on the web is really important, and you want to tailor your socials or your online presence according to who you're trying to target. So if you're trying to transition out of academia, there's not really any point having your LinkedIn profile geared towards information that other academics will like to see. So know what that industry is looking for and change accordingly. And so I definitely recommend changing your LinkedIn, any internal websites that you might have, or maybe if you're on Twitter, begin to change your audience or start approaching other audiences that might be relevant to where you're trying to go. And as a not so subtle plug, I've recently recorded a seminar series all about the use of social media as an academic. And if you're particularly interested about the use of LinkedIn and why it can be useful, check out this link here. Now, I think it's important to touch on, what other people think when you are telling other people that you're thinking about transitioning out of academia. And there's really two mindsets. There's the mindset of the person that you're telling, and then the mindset of yourself. So I thought it'd be a little bit of an interesting experience to test out or show you what the 3 stages of reactions that you typically get. So normally when you're telling people you're leaving academia, obviously it'll be your family first. Once you've got their approval, then it's talking to your mentors and sort of gauging their response, or at least telling them that that's what you're thinking of doing. And so initially you'll get this look of shock. It'll be like, what? Haven't you just spent the last 5 to 10 years building up your attraction or a track record in academia, and now you want to leave? And then that quickly moves into emergency mode, where they're like, oh my God, this is the worst decision ever. What's going to happen to your academic track record? You'll never be able to come back in. And I think it's really important that it's not that they think you're crazy. I think they're just trying to provide good advice for you, because realistically the people you're telling are probably close mentors, people that might have followed your journey, and they're just trying to look out for you. And for most of us, a lot of our mentors are going to be those who are well established in academia. Maybe they're 10 to 20 years being a lab head, and academia is all that they're focused on, and they may not have really thought about the impacts of other industries or looking outside of academia. So for them, it may be a bit of a shock and come as, is this the right thing to be doing? And that's natural. And so quickly though, they begin to realize that, okay, I see, what your thought process is and, what you've been building up to. And usually it's through back and forth questions of, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? And then this process is actually really rewarding to try and cement the idea that you do want to transition, because these conversations will highlight any gaps or weaknesses or gaps in your logic that you may not have thought about. But usually, hopefully, you've done all your research and you've made the right decision, and they'll see that too. But internally, these are the 3 stages. You sort of start off like, you get this first idea of maybe transitioning out of academia is a good idea, and then you'll be thinking, is this really a good idea? I have been spending a lot of time trying to get this career, now I want to move out. And then you start having those conversations, and it's like this wall of barrage of somewhat negativity, or at least trying to defend yourself. And then after all those discussions, you found out that your logic was on point and this is the right call. Sure, maybe there is still a bit of a risk. You never know what's going to take, but this seems like the right decision with the information at the time. And so I think it's really important here to outline that you do need to face the realities though, and that your priorities will change. So as I mentioned before, I am 0.5 academic, 0.5 business owner. And so we all know that academia is essentially 1.5 or 150% a full-time job. And so when you begin to add in another career option at the same time, as well as any other priorities in your life. So for me, for example, I've got a 3-year-old who obviously I want to be a good father to, and I've got my wife who's doing her PhD, and I obviously want to try and help out as much as I can so that she can maximize her time and succeed in academia as well. So with all these different things, you have to accept the reality that you can't be everything, and that realistically your publication productivity or your productivity in academia is going to drop. And that makes sense because you're going from a 1 full-time position down to a 50% role. So you have to expect that, but it is always hard to really adapt to that, particularly for someone who's an overachiever who's always, tried to put as much into it, that you have to accept that the productivity will drop in both of your areas. And I want to reinforce that with anyone sort of observing any other scientist, whether that's in or outside of academia, is to always be kind and always realize that everyone is on a different journey. What you physically see may not represent, what you perceive them to be. And so I've definitely been guilty of this. I think when I was doing my PhD, I had no responsibilities whatsoever. I would come in and work whenever I could, 12-hour days. And I always used to look at other people who weren't spending as much time in the lab and say, are you as dedicated? I don't know. Particularly those that had kids that, they would maybe come in at 10 and leave at 4. And I was like, man, are you really that, engaged in your research? And I've quickly realized that, yes, they are incredibly engaged. If they're in academia, they're really into it. It's not a career that you would be just coasting along in. And what you physically see doesn't represent what's happening in their life. So you don't get to see them waking up at 4 a.m. every morning to do 2 to 3 hours work before their kid wakes up to drop them off to daycare. You're not seeing them, jump on the laptop, at 9 o'clock after everyone's gone to bed, trying to squeeze in those few hours. You really don't see those optics. And I think it's really important to realize that everyone is on a different journey, and what you might see might not reflect what's happening or what their dedication is. And then lastly, to finish up, I would just say, be open to exploring, and you might be surprised at what you find. So I know for myself, I've been incredibly surprised at how rewarding going into another career option has been, and balancing that with an academic thing, because we tend to get this sort of thing in our mindset where it's like, research is the ultimate. It's so much freedom to be able to explore what you want, and it's flexible. I'm sure there's some negatives, but the ability to find new knowledge and create break new ground is incredibly rewarding, and you can't get that elsewhere, which I've come to realize is not true. There's incredible number of transferable skills and stuff that you need to do in other job roles. So the research side of things, I'm always doing that in my business. I'm always trying to look for new creative ideas, looking for new technology that I can incorporate. There's a lot of research around that, looking for potential new collaborators. All of these things have been really transferable and are equally satisfying me in the same role as academia, or even if more. So be open to exploring. You might be surprised, because we obviously know that academia is pretty tight right now. COVID hasn't helped it. It's probably made it even worse. And some of the, stability now is probably even more questionable. So it's always worthwhile having a look out, because I think we can get our blinders on, just focused on the research, because you need to be on point. But taking that moment to step back and reflect, are you enjoying this experience? Is this definitely the right career option to go down? If it is, yep, go for it, go at 100%. But if you're getting some doubts, have a look around. Lastly, I would just like to say that if any of this content was useful, definitely check out STEMventurist on YouTube and my other socials. I'm all about trying to provide as much career advice, giving that extra edge to succeed in science, whether that's inside or outside of academia. And I talk about anything from science communication to improving your grant writing, improving your grant success rate, to how to network, how to use social media, all in digestible formats that you can access, while you can watch while you're doing an incubation during a middle experiment, skill up, and give you that little extra edge to succeed in academia. So with that, I'll finish up, and happy to answer any questions. Thanks. That's it for today. Hopefully you enjoyed. If you want to see the other parts of this series, make sure to click this video or this video here. And as always, nothing ventured, nothing gained, and I'll see you next time.